For the Lord, and when it's talking about Lord there, it's talking about Yahweh. It's talking about the self-existent one, the eternal one. So for the Lord, or for Yahweh, is the great God, and God there is El, or talking about his might, his strength, his power, is the great Almighty, the great King above all kings. So what the psalmist is saying here is that whoever, whatever, they were worshiping as gods. Yahweh is supreme over all, and while those other gods were just imaginatory or imagination of those, that our God Yahweh is the supreme ruler of the universe. So that first question there, why do you think the idea of kingship is so hard for us to grasp? Because in the culture when this was written, sovereign ruler, sovereign king, it was easy for those in Israel to understand because they lived in it and they were surrounded by it. But why do you think it's so hard for us to really grasp that concept of kingship?
We don't live in a country where there's a king, where the king is all powerful and makes the final decision about everything.
Right. We don't live there, and what did we reject as Americans when we founded this country? We rejected monarchy, we rejected kingship. In our country, it seems like, we were built on individuality and things. So we place high value on personal freedom and individuality. The idea of yielding completely to a king goes against our grain of our culture. So it just, when we see this here as far as great king, talking about his kingship and things, the great king above all gods, sometimes we need to stop and reflect on, just the fact that it's hard for us to grasp that idea sometimes, and what the writer was talking about in Psalms here. Well, that second question in there, how can reminding ourselves that God is King of the universe, but also King of our lives and our hearts, help us in our prayer life?
Can you read that again?
Yeah, how can reminding ourselves that God is King of the universe, like the psalmist said here, but is also King of our lives and our hearts, how can that help us in our prayer life?
Help us to be respectful.
Okay, reverential, respectful. Okay, good. What else?
To pray according to his will.
To pray for his will.
Yeah, according to his will.
To understand, I think it would help to understand too that God is ultimately in charge, not me.
Exactly, yeah. That also, it reminds us that who's truly on the throne. Is it God or is it me on the throne? And I think reminding ourselves in our prayer life as far as, saying he is, using that he is king, how much that will help us to remember who's on the throne, not me.
Thinking of it also, I think it's easy to fall into the God is a vending machine trope, where we just keep asking and asking, and we don't bring that. When we go to God in prayer, it's really a petition. And when we think of him as King of the universe, King of our lives, it can help us, it can help remind us that this is a petition that we're bringing to him, not I press the numbers on the keypad and a Mountain Dew falls out.
Right. Yeah, and like we talked about on Sunday, I believe it was, what C.S. Lewis said about even if God was not a benevolent God, like our God is, even if our God was not compassionate and loving, we would still have to, because he is God, we would still be responsible for being reverential to him and worshiping him because he is God, even if he didn't have the attributes our God has. And that's why we can be so thankful, because we have a benevolent king We have, and we're going to talk about it more, a king that is unfailing in his love and in his compassion and in his mercy. But to remind ourselves that he's not a bad king. He is a benevolent king that only has our best interests at heart. So, anyone else on how that could help us? I had written down here, too many people want Christ as their Savior, but not as their King. Too many people want the benefits, like Gavin was talking about, but they don't want to submit. They don't want to change. So we need to be careful of that. And then, one of the things, the next question there, are there specific ways you could incorporate the language of God's kingship into your personal prayers?
Jeff, one thing I looked at was how kings got addressed in the Old Testament. And especially I thought of in the story of Esther, when she approaches the king, the way that she talks to her husband, the king, is still with a lot of care. And I mean, there was a lot of ceremony in the ways that a king was treated, but there was also just this almost there was fear of
What he could
being
do.
careful in how you approach. And they used words like, she would say, "O king, live forever," before she would say anything to him. She would say, "If it pleases the king." And there would be all these phrases like, "If it pleases you." Over and over in the Old Testament, the Israelite kings were hailed as, "My master, O king." And then they would say things like, "At your discretion, O king." So there was a lot of this language that was deferential and yielding to, before I ask anything, I'm placing you on top and saying that your will comes before mine.
Good. So we can do that same thing in our prayers, recognizing and remembering, who God is and where our place is. Kind of like Job, we're studying Job in our week, in our daily readings and things. But I was just thinking about when God talks to him, where were you when I? Where were you when I? And we just need to remember our place. And I had a question down here. Do you see any benefit of writing out our prayers?
Done that. It's been forever ago. And I have done that. And I think sometimes when you write, it can be, I know what I'm thinking, I'm trying to think how to say it. Like, it's more deep sometimes. I feel like you could get more out for whatever reason. When you write, it tends to be more deep than when you're just saying something out loud, thinking in your head.
Yeah, it's something that we had written on the board, how we wanted to improve our prayer life on last Wednesday evening and things. And we talked about how we wanted to have more focus and more concentration. And I think when we express our gut level feelings to God, and I think sometimes when I pray at least, I get, I don't think as deep as I would if I don't concentrate and I don't spill my guts to God as if I took the time to think about it as I'm writing out my prayer to him.
What another benefit too of writing would be that you can look back and see how God answered certain prayers.
Yes. Yeah, and we'll talk about that, the great deeds he has done in our lives in just a little bit, another question here, but that is good. As we write our prayers like that, we can look back and see how God has answered those prayers.
The other thing on too is you were talking about it making you better concentrate. I think it takes time to sit down and do that.
Yeah, and like you said, it helps us dig deeper in our thoughts rather than just getting our prayers out real quick. Anything else?
Have you ever tried keeping a prayer journal for a period of time? What do you, and when you just...
I think it's a great idea to do that.
Kind of a, execution question. If you write it out, then do you read it or say it, or is writing it
Kids think we
good enough? You write it, then say it, or do you just...
It would benefit me to write it and say it.
At the same time, or like say it after you
Either
wrote it?
Either to me. I mean,
Yeah.
as I'm writing, I'm speaking with him.
Right.
My God. So But I just think, and that's something that I want to look into and try to start doing is journaling more that way. Next question, number 2 there, read 86:10. For you are great and do marvelous deeds, you alone are God. 86:10 there. How can remembering God's works, marvelous deeds like we just talked about, especially in our own lives, build faith during difficult times and improve our prayer life?
Well, it can help you to be more grateful. And it can help you to remember that God got you through, you know, it can help you to remember God's blessings.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
He isn't just left. So,
Recalling how he previously intervened
yeah.
in our lives. And we have to remember, and Greg brought it up the other day, and we've talked about it, how our emotions can be very fickle. Our emotions do not necessarily equal truth. What is truly going on, what's truly happening. Emotions can be very fickle, and we have to remember that because we can be our emotions can be very much in left field sometimes, about how life is and things. And that does not necessarily equal to what is really true. And I think recalling what he's done for us in the past can help bring us back with our emotions, bring us back and center us. And it builds trust, and that he will continue, as we talk about some of these attributes later on tonight, it will continue to build trust and faith in him because we know the type of God he is and how much he loves us. And it'll shift our focus away from our problems to his power. Okay. Yeah.
I think it also just reminds you, like, I feel like a lot of the time we put a handicap on God and we're afraid to ask him for the big things and the big problems. And so I think by reminding yourself, like, God, you are great, you do marvelous deeds. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus fed 5,000 people. Like, that's
Yeah.
insane to us.
Yeah.
So remembering that will help you ask for what you actually
Big things.
Yeah.
For a long time, I prayed about abortion. I prayed that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. And that was one of those big prayers. But I prayed that it would be overturned in my lifetime. And God can answer big prayers. We think about, a lot of people have been praying for peace in Israel and Gaza. And we see that it seems to be there's some type of a truce that's brewing there. So don't just give God the little prayers. Pray big. We all need to be praying big. Pray big for our family here. And then I also had down here, it renews intimacy with God, remembering what he has done for me. So it renews that. Lamentations. I want to read something from Lamentations real quick. Lamentations chapter 3. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, years and years of trials and suffering and things. And in chapter 3, when you look at like verses 1 through 17, or 1 through 16, 17, it's just, he has made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. He's besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness, hardship. He has made me dwell in darkness. And all those verses down through that first part of chapter 3 are like that. And in verse 16, he has broken my teeth with gravel. He has trampled me under the dust. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. And then listen to verses 18 through 24. So I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped for from the Lord. I remember my affliction, my wandering, the bitterness, the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fails. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, my Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. So we see almost verses 1 through, let's see, 1 through 20, you know, his emotions there, and then he brings himself back to the center. He brings himself back to the truth. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I hope. You know, so he remembers, what he transforms by the renewing of his mind. He remembers all the ways God's provided for him in the past. And he remembers God's attributes and how God is. And we need to do the same thing when our emotions get out of check, is to remember our God, all the things that he has done for us, how he is faithful, how he is loving, how he is compassionate, and he will continue to provide for us. So, okay. So Psalm 5, verse 2. Listen to my cry, my King, my God, for you I pray. And also, you know, we see that my King and my God. And then also Thomas, after Christ is resurrected and a week later, when Thomas is in the same room with the apostles. And, you know, Christ says, well, stick your hand here in my side. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. But what can we learn from the psalmist's use of my King and my God about how we approach God in our prayers?
He determines our ultimate respect, and also that he has the power to grant things to benefit us.
Yeah.
We may not think it would benefit us right at that time. Using my own situation where I've lost 2 wives. At the first, I was really depressed about it, and the preachers got to talking to me, and we come to an understanding. They're not suffering now, and they're in a better place than we are, and we've got to look forward to that opportunity when it comes our turn to go, that we would be in that same position if we're true to God.
Yep. And we look like we did earlier about the King and God, and I think that's what you're talking about there, how he has the power, but also where the first part, where it has that my King and my God, that possessive pronouns there. What benefit do you see in our prayers by using possessive pronoun like that? My God and my King. Like John did, my Lord and my God. What's that? It shows our relationship with him. It shows our personal relationship with him. It reflects a personal relationship with God, trusting he knows us intimately, like we talked about on Sunday in Psalm 139, how he created us, how he knows our days, how he knows everything about us. He knows us intimately. He is, and like Taylor said, that relational indicates relationship there. He cares about our unique needs. And my King, like Chet was saying, my King, the sovereignty, the power that he has, and how he can do things in my life. And we defer to his providence and his guidance. We can approach him with reverence as the King, as Andrew was talking about, and we can approach him with intimacy, my Abba Father. But just reminds us of that relationship when we say, my God, my King.
I think that it shows a lot to, the word my indicates that you're claiming something, right? And
There's some kind of a relationship there.
And you think about it as, in an earthly earthly standpoint, when you claim something here on earth, most of the time you have a connection with it, or it means something to you. And when you say this,
This is my wife.
this belongs to me, it's weird to think about the phrase that God belongs to me, but in a sense, like we belong together, both of us, right? It's a destined thing for us to belong together. So there's something to say with claiming God in our lives, right? It's just a statement that shows that I claim Him in my life. Like that's how much He means to me.
Yep, yep,
Going off that intimacy point you're making.
yep. Anyone else? Andrew?
As soon as you say my king, you're saying I am subject. If I met a foreign king, if I met the King of Spain or the King of England, I might address him as Your Majesty, but he's not my king. I don't have to do what he says. But if I say to someone, my king, I am subject. I have to do what they say. I am acknowledging that you have power over me. So coming to God with my king is coming to him with a mind to bend and conform to his will.
Yep, exactly. Perfect. Any other thoughts? Well, that was not good. Okay. Psalm 18, 1 through 3. Let me get there real quick in my Bible. I have some other things for that one. Talking about I love you, O Lord, and we see the my used a lot here. My strength, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I am saved from my enemies. So what great truths does this imagery, because there's a lot of imagery in that little bit of writing there, those few verses. But what does that imagery, what great truths do you see from that? My rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my shield, my stronghold. Some may say fortress.
I mean, each one of those terms are a positive term, right? It's something that is good in my life. But not only that, it's the structure. It's kind of saying, Lord, my life is about you. My life has been protected by you, and it's all because of you, who I am today, and how things happen in my life today.
Yeah, each one of those images up there conveys protection. David recognized how he owed his entire safety to God and his entire protection to God. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit when we get to Psalm 23, about protection. But that idea of rock and fortress, strength and permanency and stability and support and a place of safety and protection. Deliverer, how he saves, he protects. It's kind of like the lifeguard. Refuge, a place of security in times of threat. Shield, protection in dangerous situations. Horn of salvation. His salvation or his victory there. And then his high tower or fortified high place. Again, my stronghold, my high tower. Again, it's protection. So you see this idea of protection in each one of those, images there. And then, how can meditating on these truths help our prayer life in times of stress, temptations, or difficulties?
I think knowing that God is there for you.
Knowing that God is there for you? Yep.
I'd like to maybe adding one thing to what Samantha said. Not only is God there, but he doesn't move. The rock and the stronghold are always in the place where you left them. They don't get picked up and moved somewhere else. You know where to find them, and you go back to where they are because they're unmoving.
Yeah, the idea of permanency there. Again, keeping these ideas in mind, these images in mind, it helps us to shift our focus from our abilities to his abilities. helps us to cling to His promises of strength and guidance. What else? And that idea of meditating, we talked about that a little bit in Psalm 1 when it talked about the happy man, how he meditates on the Word of God day and night. And that idea of meditating there, and I found this interesting, it's this idea of to murmur, to mutter, to make an audible noise. So it's this idea of deep thinking and chewing on. Let's see, He parted the heaven and came to dark clouds under Him. It's this idea of really deep thinking in this audible sound when you're meditating or you're chewing on it. So when we're meditating or we're chewing on the fact that He is our rock, He is our strength, He is our fortress, and how that builds faith and meditating on these things. Gavin?
I think also with this question, how can meditating on these things help our prayer life in times of stress and temptation and difficulties? I think we also see in this passage a sense of escape or residence with all those things, a rock, a fortress. This is where I want to reside. This is where I want to escape to. So it can also help us if we're thinking on how He is our rock, how He is our fortress. When we go to pray, we'll do it more often instinctively because that's our escape. That's where we are going to in the hard times. We're escaping to that fortress, that rock.
Yeah. Good thoughts. Chet, do you have anything? Okay.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about that introductory there. I love you, O Lord, and think of everything this passage contains in it. What is the significance in approaching God with that phrase, I love you, Lord? Because I personally look back in my life. How many times in my prayer life have I opened or even said once that, Lord, I love you? And the sentiment there, so I think there's, my question is, what is the importance of that? And why is that important, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think expressing our love for Him, to Him, we don't do enough. But I think it is important, but I just don't think.
Yeah, like I said, it's something I look back on, and how many times, if ever, I'm sure I have once or twice, but it really got me thinking on, man, like, all that He's done for me and all that He is for me, the least I can do is let Him know how much I appreciate Him. And I'm sure He appreciates that.
Yeah.
That sentiment of, oh, you are acknowledging the love that you have for me. And I think it's important that we look back in our lives and say, should I address that more often?
Yes.
Should that be more, should that take more of a priority? Not for repetitiveness, but for this, I actually need this.
Yeah,
You know? So I just thought that was a cool side point.
Yeah, good point. 23rd Psalm. Let's all turn over there. 23rd Psalm. Somebody go ahead and read that. And one of the things, I don't know, Psalm 22, if you're familiar with Psalm 22, it starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it goes through, it's a messianic psalm that talks about so much about what Christ went through on the cross. And that it's from the viewpoint of Christ looking down from the cross and what all's happening around Him and things. But one of the commentaries that I was looking at said there would be no Psalm 23 without what took place in Psalm 22. And I thought that was a cool point. But somebody go ahead and read. Now, as someone reads Psalm 23, notice the number of first-person pronouns, I, my, and me in this. There's 16 times that's used in 6 verses. Yeah. So, it's a very personal psalm, very personal to the psalmist. It's not some kind of abstract ideas. It's very personal with all of the times that those first-person pronouns are used. So somebody go ahead and read Psalm 23.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou hast prepared a place. Thou hast prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you, Jim. I think this is important for us to remember too. Well, question number 8 and 9, but what does Psalm 23 tell us about our God?
That he's our comfort. Sure.
He's our comfort. There's a great deal of intimacy between, the shepherd.
There's guidance with protection.
There's guidance, there's protection, but it shows that the shepherd is very active. It shows our God is very active.
It's not just
Right. He's an active shepherd. He's concerned for the welfare. He protects, he provides, he cares for. And then what did David mean when he stated, "My cup overflows"? That's an easy one. Yeah, when David says here, you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Our blessings. It means there's just this overflowing abundance, doesn't it? When he's talking about my cup overflows. And then I've got the question here. In what ways has God made your cup overflow? And think about when we're going to God in prayer, how beneficial it is to remember how he has overflowed our cups for us. But just think about, when we're praising him and when we're honoring him, all that he has done for us. Remembering what my life would have been like without Christ. Remembering the blessings of my family here. Remembering the blessings he's given me in my physical family. All these things. He's made every one of our cups overflow in here. And to enunciate those or to write those down, to be aware of those and to take those to him in prayer and thankfulness and praise is important. Rachel?
I think it's really, I don't know the best way to say this, but the beginning of that verse 5, it says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies," which is really personal to David because he was anointed in front of all these people who didn't want to see him become king. They didn't want to see him.
Yeah, you want to kill him.
Yeah, they wanted him dead. And we may not have enemies in the same sense of the word, but Satan's around us. He wants us to fail. And God still overflows our cups.
Yeah. It provides and protects just like the psalmist here. And then what does this psalm tell us about how God wants us to respond to difficulties and anxieties in our life? How many defense mechanisms do sheep have, like other animals? Running. Running's about it. But they really have no defense mechanisms, and that's why a shepherd is so important to them. When I was thinking about this, the shepherd or the sheep are completely dependent upon the shepherd. I want to read you something.
John 10.
What's that?
I said John 10.
I was thinking of Ephesians 6. I was thinking of Ephesians 6. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Because if we try with our power to defend ourselves against Satan, we're going to fail, just like the sheep. So we need to depend upon His mighty power. We need to depend upon Him just like a sheep depends upon the shepherd for the care and the protection. So, and then, let's see what I had here. Philippians 4. Yeah, I won't go on that one. So.
See in John 10, he talks about all the things that the shepherd does for the sheep.
Right.
And he distinguishes between the good shepherd and the hireling, and how the hireling is only there for what he can get out of it.
Yeah.
And he'll not.
Yeah, he's not going to protect. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Talked about read Psalm 34:18 in 145. That should have been 18 instead of 145:8. So a little typo there. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The Lord is near to all who call on Him, in truth. So the question, in moments when you feel distant from God, what practical steps can you take to call on Him and remember His promise to be near?
Being totally honest, kind of like what's done in the Psalms.
Yeah, being totally honest.
Even going so far as to say, God, I feel distant from you.
Yes, exactly. Being transparent with Him. Speak to God openly about your feelings of distance and doubt and brokenness. Like we talked about, meditate on the Scriptures. Let me read something real quick. When Stephen was being stoned, when we usually think about Christ, do we usually think about on His throne? How do you usually visualize Him? What do Scriptures usually talk about Christ's position when He's on the throne? He's usually sitting on the throne, isn't He?
But in this passage, he's standing. Stephen's
Exactly. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Look, he said, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Why do you think Christ was standing at that moment instead of sitting on the throne?
Because sitting would seem more like,
If your child...
kind of don't care. I don't know how to explain it. But
it shows concern, doesn't it? He's looking down on one of his saints and what's about to happen to him. So he's concerned. And I think this idea of the Lord is close, the Lord is near, the Lord has concern for us. And I think this idea of the portrayal of Christ standing when Stephen is being stoned is the fact that Christ has concern for him, just like He has concern for us. Okay.
Maybe think of yourself at a sporting event, and the game is sort of placid, nothing real exciting going on, and then it's when that your team scores a goal or something,
Yeah,
You jump up, you're concerned. That's the way Jesus was.
yeah, his concern. So a lot of good imagery in tonight's discussion about, the fortress, the shepherd, all these things here. And then there's Edwin Crozier in the book, he had probably 10 or 12 scriptures on the love of God, but we'll just look at a couple here. Many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love, not just love, but unfailing love surrounds the man who trusts him. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. So look at Psalm 51, that penitential psalm, and what David is calling upon him in that first verse to forgive him. He's talking about the characteristics or the attributes of God. According to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. When I said my foot is slipping, your love, O Lord, supported me. For the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. So God's love is constant even when we fall short. How does this truth encourage you to be honest and vulnerable in your prayers? We've talked a lot in the past couple of lessons about being vulnerable, being open with our God, knowing how his love is unfailing for us, how much he loves us.
I would even touch on that. I think that right there can be hard for people to understand, and so that's why they're afraid to be totally open with God.
Yeah. And like Aaron brought up, strong, loving relationships are honest and transparent. And if we have a strong, loving relationship, we're honest and transparent with our God, even when, we're expressing our deepest emotions to him. God, why? God, I don't like this. Just like the psalmist has done in a number of the psalms we've looked at. So, his love invites openness and honesty when true connection can take place, I have here. His love is unshakable and unfailing. So, okay, thank you for your comments tonight.